Yeah, look, thanks a lot for inviting me to speak here. So, what I'm going to be covering is why IoT and smart technologies are essential to solving complex community challenges. So, as you mentioned, I've got about half an hour here. I've got 10 slides that I'd like to get through, and there's really three key ideas that I'd like to try and communicate. So, the first is really I'd like to try and understand or explore why community challenges are complex in today's environment, particularly for council. I'd then like to take a little bit of time to explore some of the tools that we have available to us, particularly IoT and smart technologies. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about what that actually means to us and what some of the barriers to preventing this being deployed on a larger scale are, and just get the conversation started. So that's what I'd like to cover. A little bit about me to start off with, so it's not just some random person talking to you. So look, my name's Simon Maselli. I'm the CEO and founder of Innovation Technologies. We started the company back in 2013. It was myself and another gentleman at that stage, and we were a pure engineering consultancy. So we used to go around to site. We used to take measurements using scientific equipment, and then we'd bring that back to our office. We'd analyse that and produce a report. And it come to a point where I thought there has to be a better way to do this, right? There's got to be technologies out there that can make this a lot more simple, make this a lot more automated. Because I'm a little bit lazy, right? I don't want to use that word in a negative context, but I kind of wanted to make things a bit easier for myself in particular. So I went out to the marketplace, and myself and Tom at the time, and we looked what was available, and there was lots available, right? There was some really, really expensive equipment that did this. There was some really, really cost-effective equipment coming in from China, but that required us to build a system around it. So we kind of took the middle road and thought, well, there's no complete systems out there to do this. There's no way to pull data from different systems and analyze that autonomously and provide the end user with the reports or the alerts or those sorts of things that they need to automate their daily activities in a really seamless manner. So we started building something, and we built what we call AlphaX. So AlphaX is essentially the main ingredient and the main product that we have. We've won lots of awards, you name it, we've won lots of awards for our stuff, but we're not really here to talk about myself or my company. I just really wanted to give you a bit of context about us and our company and where we've come from, to try and paint a bit of a picture of what I'm going to cover off on today. So Laura, if we could flick to the next slide, that'd be great.
I'm in.
So we've really got a bit of an elephant in the room, right, when we talk about local government, and that is that local government is huge. If we talk about the population growth here in the world, we're about 1 billion people in the 1800s. We're 8 billion now in the 2020s. We're projected to be 10 billion by the time we reach 2050. And if we're to scale this back to Casey and what Casey looks like, Casey 2017 had 323,000 people. By 2040, we're projected to be up over 500,000 people. So, we've got this amazing growth here in Casey, and this is just creating more and more challenges for us to overcome. Geographically, we've got more town centres popping up all over the place. We've got the Clyde Town Centre, we've got town centres, projected all around the place if you look at the growth charts. And city centres, are only getting bigger and more complex and more dense. We've got more assets to manage all of those people, but as well as the scale in terms of the population growth, we've also got scale in terms of the services that are offered from council. And what I mean by that is 2 or 3 years ago, nobody would have imagined that we have pandemic response officers. But now every council has a couple of these at least to look at those sorts of problems. 10 or 15 years ago, we never would have had a smart city officer. And now Laura has an amazing smart cities team there that is doing all of these things that we were never thinking about. So as well as scale in terms of population growth, we've also got scale in these services. Excuse me. And these services are not only new services, they are also more specialised. So, you know, again, we never would have thought, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, we would have thought about equality and diversity, but we never really had dedicated resources to making sure that that was something that we delivered in terms of our community. And now we've got, you know, officers that are out there deliberately doing these things because as a community, we've matured, right, and we're thinking about things a lot more differently. So this really presents a whole different way of thinking about the challenges we have in our community. So if you could jump to the next slide, please, Laura. And then we've got this other thing coming through called digitalization, right, and globalization and industrialization and all of those sorts of things. And I think it might be easier to explain this with a bit of a chart that I've borrowed from McKinsey. So if we could jump into the next slide. So this is really talking about industrialization. And why this is important to council or to communities is because it means it's showing us how things have become more complex and more intertwined as time has progressed. So if we look down at the left-hand side and we start with Industry 1, right, we had mechanism and steam power. And the problems we were probably thinking about then as a council is how do we get a train station or how do we get a train line to come into our city, right? That would have been the biggest problem you had of that day. And then we move, you know, through to Industry 2, and we're talking about things like electricity and mass production lines. And we would have introduced another set of challenges in that, you know, we've got now to light the streets, or we need to make roads to, you know, fit all Henry Ford's cars in, or, you know, all of these sorts of challenges got a little bit more complex. And then, you know, if we progress to the 1950s or the 1960s, we've got automation and computers and electronics, right? We've got things like computers coming about, and we've got these IT departments starting to pop up in council, and, you know, networks and infrastructure and all of those sorts of things. It's just becoming more and more complex. And then if we move into what's known as Industry 4.0, we've actually got these cyber physical systems and Internet of Things and networks coming in. So the set of challenges that we've got is much more complex. And I'd like to just drill down into Industry 4 a little bit more. We're talking about here having small little systems that can be easily deployed, living out in the world all over the place. And what I mean by that is we can have a microcontroller that has more power in it than we used to send people to the moon, you know, 50 years ago, sitting above a doorway counting people coming through. Now, I'd just like people to take a moment to think about that's more power in this little sensor sitting above a doorway than we actually used to send people to the moon 50 years ago. And these things are being deployed in mass, right? This is what Industry 4 is about, setting these little systems up around the place that feed information back from the physical world to our digital world, you know, in basically real time, and connecting all of the systems that we had in Industry 1, Industry 2, and Industry 3 together. So if you flick over to the next slide, please, Laura, that really is something that is really complex, right? And I love this picture. I was going through Usplash or Unsplash or whatever it's called to find some pictures for this presentation, and this one popped up when I typed in complex, and I thought that is a really great analogy of what complex is if we look at that root system. And you see at the trunk there, we've got our core, imagine our core services in the council that are fairly big and, you know, solid, and we know about those. But as time's gone on and as our council has grown, same as this tree has grown, we've got these intertwining services that all follow each other out and branch out and interconnect in different ways and go into new pieces of dirt or new parts of the community that we've never serviced before in the past. So I think, you know, this slide actually sums up the complexity that the council has got. deal with. And it's not only council, right? This is any industry that we talk about is facing these same challenges. Whether I talk about our mining customers, whether I talk about our, our smart cities customers, whether I talk about our smart buildings or our facilities management customers, they're all dealing with the same sorts of problems. We are all, as a community, dealing with the same problems. So we've got some tools to help us, and the first of those is the Internet of Things, and that's our segue, Laura. Beautiful, she's on it. The first tool that we've really got in our bag of tricks to try and help us address these challenges is the Internet of Things. Now, what I would like to try and communicate here is that the Internet of Things is not a thing, pardon the pun. It's really a collection of technologies that have come together to enable us to have low-cost, reliable data collection and comms. And like I was saying before, there are these really, really small but powerful sensors out there. And I think the most important one we carry around with us all the time, and that's in our pocket, our mobile phone. It's a really great example of the Internet of Things. It is constantly collecting information from around us about the environment, about the way we use the world, about our health, our how many steps we take in a day, all of those sorts of things. That is a great example of an Internet of Things device, collecting information to send that to the digital world. Now, there is one company in the world that, or a few of them, but one company in particular that really stands out at being able to utilize a lot of this data, and that's Google, right? Google knows more about you than you probably know yourself. And that's simply because they're taking data from the world around us and making sense of it. Now, one thing that, before we move on, I think is important to understand is the Internet of Things is not about communication between people, right? This is not a tool that we use to communicate between people. And this is actually my first point that I wanted to do on this slide. That is an entirely different set of technologies. The Internet of Things is about machine-to-machine communications, yeah? So it's about taking data from around the world and sending that to another machine to do something with. So it's really taking the human element out of it. And I hope some of the examples I give in the case study section here really explain how that takes place. But let's talk about the data that's produced from these sensors. So that's really where another technology called AI really comes into its own. So let's talk about AI and what it is in its current format and what it's not. Skynet and the Terminator, right, is often what people think about when they talk about AI. But AI in reality is not like that. Not like that today, and I don't think it will ever be like that in the future, because we don't want it to become another organism, right? We don't want it to become a human. What we want to use AI to do is to really help us to do things. And what AI is really great at doing is repeating complex tasks over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And if you think about the example we talked about with IoT before, this mobile phone collecting all of this data about one person, let's scale that out a little bit, and let's talk about every person in Casey being connected to a mobile phone. Or let's imagine every person, I don't know, 10-year-olds have phones now, so let's imagine every person above 10 having a mobile phone in their pocket, right? And all of the data that we're collecting from that person. And let's imagine Bunjil Place has 30 or 40 or 50 sensors in it to connect where people are moving around throughout the building. And I'm using that example because I'm looking at a few of them now, right? It's just something that's there for me. So, we're starting to collect all of this data, and all of this data has to be analyzed in some way for us to create value from it. Because data on its own doesn't have any intrinsic value, right? It's just sitting there. It's just a number. It's a 1 or a 0 essentially. So we need to take that data and convert it to value. And the way we do that is through AI. So we can get the AI to look for patterns within our data. We can get it to predict when things are likely to happen, so we can make better decisions based on that data. We can get it to create an alert for us if things are outside of set parameters, and all of these really interesting things that in the past would have required a person to sit there and analyze the data, and we're creating so much data now that it's just very not practical at all. So AI is the other tool that we have to have in our toolkit. So let's look at some examples of where we can potentially pull this together, Laura. So I'd like to jump over to the case studies. So I've got a couple of case studies that I'd like to share with you. The first is case study number 1, pedestrian counting in Chapel Street. So Minovation has deployed some cameras in Chapel Street, Melbourne, that counts basically millions of cars per day. It's really as simple as that. Millions of cars per day, millions of cars per year, and millions of pedestrians per year. Now, the interesting thing about this is it's essentially a camera that's sitting on a pole there in the main street, and it just sits there autonomously counting away, doing these repetitions that I was talking about earlier. And why this is important is we've actually been able to identify that the camera is more accurate than a person sitting there counting people. So we've had people with clickers up and down the street of Chapel Street comparing the numbers of the cars against the numbers that the cameras are putting out versus the manual counts, and people's perception or people's concentration wanes and they don't count the people. Cars go behind other cars and you don't count them. Cars sit steady and they can't be tracked, and then you lose track of, have I counted this car once or twice, when the traffic lights change, and all of these sorts of things. So we've actually identified that the humans are less accurate than the cameras in counting, and I think that's really important for what we're trying to communicate here, and that's that IoT and smart technologies are really important to solving community challenges, because we don't want to introduce bias from humans and from people making mistakes and from people getting bored and all of those sorts of things. And another example of where this could potentially, I got another example. Yeah, you're getting a bit excited, a bit of trigger happy there, Laura. Another example of where this is really well used is for the city of Casey. We actually did a study a few years ago now, and we looked at the maintenance that was being undertaken on the council assets, and we used a process called planned maintenance optimization. So let me give a bit of a comparison of planned maintenance optimization done manually versus done with AI. So the manual process, I was involved in about 7 or 8 years ago. We had 10 engineers in a room going through 56,000 assets and optimizing the maintenance done on those assets in a manual way. So they're just looking at the asset, they're looking at how often how often the maintenance was being done, what sort of maintenance was being done, what the costs of that were, would it be more efficient to do it one way or the other. So that was 10 man years worth of work at that cost to analyse 56,000 assets. Minovation took 400,000 assets in the city of Casey, run this at the manual process, gave about 5 to 10% savings over that period of time. The AI-led process took 400,000 assets from the city of Casey, did the same process in 12 weeks. 8 weeks of that was consultation with the city of Casey, so going backwards and forwards and understanding what their requirements were and all of those sorts of things we need to do a job right. 400,000 assets, we're able to save between 10 and 20% depending on which recommendations were adopted throughout the council. So we're able to, number one, save 10 years almost of work, or 10 years of study, and an additional 10% cost saving doing exactly the same exercise, one using humans and one using AI. So I guess the rule I'm trying to get across here is, what way would you prefer to do things in the future? And I'm going to leave that, to think about. But the manual process or the automated process, it's kind of a no-brainer. So that's how IoT and AI can be used in real smart cities use cases to come up with significant cost savings, significant optimizations, significant optimizations, all of those sorts of things. But I guess the next slide is really about why isn't this stuff everywhere, right? The technology is actually available, readily available. You can get bin sensors for less than $100, stick them in a bin and get them out. And let's use that one as a really great example. So why is it that not every single bin across every single council across the globe, why doesn't it have a sensor in it? And I think the important thing here is that change is really hard to make happen. And I know Laura and her team are working really hard to make that happen across her council. And I'm sure others on this call from other councils are trying to achieve the same sort of thing. And if we come back to that bin example, the real kicker with bins is that the technology is the easy piece. It's getting the change to get the return on investment that is the difficult part. So a bin sensor can be deployed and it can tell you when it's full, it can tell you when it's empty, it can tell you how efficient you are in terms of your bin pickups and deliveries. But for those 200 years of that industrialization slide before that I showed before, people have been picking their bins up based on the cycle of the most full bin in that street. And they think it's more efficient to go through and pick up all of the bins while you're there. And the contracts that are written for the service providers are written based on lifts rather than based on efficiencies. So those two pieces of change, and I'm sure there's others that I'm sort of not thinking on while I'm on this call, but those two pieces of change are really what need to drive the technology and need to come first, the need to change and the willingness to change before the technology is able to deliver the outcomes that that really that are promised of them. And I think I would like this conversation and my presentation to maybe, even if I can just convince one person to start thinking about change and how change comes before the technology, I would love that to be the start of a conversation for some of you on this line, because that is really what we need to be smart cities. It is not the technology that is not the driver here. It needs to be changed. You need to have change first, willingness to change first, and that needs to then bring the technology along with it. So that's it on Utopia, Laura. So look, my name again is Simon Maselli. I encourage you to follow me on LinkedIn. I talk about this subject and others on there. I had a bit of a bet with a friend that I wouldn't be at 10,000 followers by the end of the year, and I've made it. So I'd like to try and really rub it in his face. If you could follow me on there, that'd be great. We're looking for partners as a company. If anybody's on the line that's a technology provider, an integrator, something like that, come and join us. We're a great team, really work well with our partners. Come and join us. We'd love to work with you.